This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Today is March 21st, 2019. Our topic of today is continue of time V2 to extend time V2 to different areas. Jay from Broadcom will lead the discussing. But before that, housekeeping announcement. Thanks everyone for attending OCP Summit last week. It was a great event. We had a lot of interesting presentations, rich content, and particularly it's great to see everyone in the community in person. We had workshop and the hackathon. So the content recording will be published on OCP site. If you go to OCP, past the event, past the summit, you can see all the videos are available and some of the slides are already available. This is a place that you can download, you can go back to watch the presentations and get slides from the summit. Also, we are working with OCP to upload the workshop slides and videos. So please stay tuned. You will see it soon. Let me pause here. Any questions or any comments? Okay. If no, the next week, again, we are going to organize this meeting as in 1 week will be 10 monitoring series. The next week will be regular discussing. The next week will be PTF test, which will be a gateway for site quality. Actually, we have contributors from community that help to write up around 40 PTF tests for site. That's our next week's topic. Around this year, we have a few areas that we are working on. You will see new proposals in net, like file management, MacStack, maybe a firewall. A few things are cooking at this moment that we would like to standardize it. Please stay tuned. With that, I'm going to give time to Jay to lead today's discussing.
Thank you, Jin. Good morning, everybody. There were a lot of folks last OCP meeting. We had a good discussion. I will just, for folks, I think, let me see. Yeah, there are a few folks who are not, who are here. So just to give you an update, Guhan and myself, we talked about the current state of the SAI, and then Guhan gave the roadmap. I gave the update on the current state of affairs uh, on the SAI itself. I'll just share the slide which we shared. Let me see, how do you click on the presenter to start sharing? So make presenter. Yes. Okay. I'll quickly just share the slides which we shared. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Jay.
All right. Thanks. So we talked about the contributors. My apologies if I missed somebody on the list. Uh, and then we talked about the use cases. And as you know, we started with the streaming telemetry interface. We defined some basic mathematical models, the constructs to attach the mathematical models. And this was essentially the foundation for uh, some point of time adding more advanced models for machine learning. We talked about the single consistent data model for internal or external consumption. and then the flexible data encoding and transport. So this is all what we have been doing since last year, and we have come to a pretty good state. Just I gave the overview of the architecture, which is a much more simplified architecture and is chip agnostic. And then a little bit on the TAM object, and then what's the current state of the affairs and what's the roadmap. So this was what was presented from my side on the TAM. Any questions before I move to the next topic? Okay, so coming back to the INT APIs, we had a discussion in last meeting, and at least my understanding is that the content is pretty mature. It's fairly with what we have agreed. And I don't have any more changes. This is the PR. I do not have any action item to do any changes. So this is where we are right now. There are no more changes. There is one thing which I have been doing. I would like to first share that so that that goes out of my plate, and then I will open the discussion for the community. So the thing which we have been doing, we defined these INT APIs, and one of the question which keeps on coming back is how does the data model will work, and especially that we have agreed on the protobuf definitions. So I pushed the data model in the data directory uh, in the GitHub, which was mainly for the streaming telemetry. I have added a simulator code for generating a data stream as if it's coming from a topology, not from a device, but a topology. And right now, topology is not strictly defined. It's a static definition. Ideally, I should have put a YAML file which you can run in a mininet. That probably we will do because that's a much bigger activity, and probably I'll put it as a separate GitHub content. But for the SAI, I have put a simple simulation environment where the data is generated from the topology, and then it is streamed out on the wire for a collector to use. And collector could be internal sonic or could be an external. So I'll just show you what I have, and then make any comments on that. So if you see here, these are the files which have been pushed out before, the SAI TAM files. These are the proto files. What I have added to that is a new proto file, which will be the TAM int proto, keeping it consistent with the naming convention. And right now, the only use case which I have added is the IFA use case. You can use it as a template and then change it to enhance it for any kind of either IFA or IAM or P4INT, whichever you want. I've just taken a stab as an IFA. And this is, again, the reason I have taken, because then it's the use case which we typically share with customers. And in OCP, a lot of customers presented the IFA use cases. So it becomes easier for me to talk about and point them to the SciSonic directories. So here, if you recall, the IFA, there's a header, which is the L3 extension header, and then every metadata stack is preceded by the metadata header, which is what you have here. And then there is a packet information, which is being sent out. So some number of bytes of packet, which are being sent out. These are configuration semantics, depends on how this is being used. You may have a flow group or flow ID definition with this data, which through which there is a need to qualify or do the binding of the packet to the flow group. That's why this is there. Actually, this packet length is not needed. I will take it out. And then there's a metadata stack. So metadata stack looks like this, right? And I have put the placeholder for IOM, if you see, right? And they're empty right now. So, and also I put a placeholder for P4INT. Right now, this is empty. So Mickey, you can take that and extend it. That will be helpful to make it complete. So that's on the proto itself. And then the code is pretty simple. We just so this is the code which is actually getting a data from the device on a raw socket. So if you see here, so I'm getting a data on a raw socket. Okay. So right now it's being listening on an interface. So I'm actually generating some traffic, but this will be not listening from an interface, but some artificial content which is read from a file or is hard coded. And from the packet itself, we extract the headers, and then we go about excuse me, go about creating the reports. And here you see the serialization or the encoding is done of the report. And then once encoding is done, so here there is the actual data which is coming from the packet. This packet will be hand carved, so which will be sitting in a file and you will just read it from there. And then after the data is there, is encoded, then we go and send it out on a port for a collector to consume. So here you will see the message is created. And finally, there is a packet out, the send, right? So this is just the client side where the data is being generated by the chip. And then the collector is is very, very simple. It's just like maybe 20, 30 lines of code. And all collector does is get the data and locks it into a file, right? So this is what it is. I'm gonna just do a small demonstration of this code, working code. And this is what I will push it into the SAI directory, create a separate directory as a sim directory, and that's where I'll push it. Okay. So before I go on the quick demo, are there any questions? Okay. So let me just show you which window is doing what. So this is my simulated collector. And if you see it, the screen is really small. I hope you're able to see it. Here I'm running the collector on a local host listening on a port 10,000, and it goes and locks the data into file. Okay. So here the collector is now, and they are the UDP messages. This is the client, which is either sitting in an embedded controller in a chip or is part of the SAI driver. So be very careful. So this is the part which is part of the SAI driver. Okay. And this is actually receiving the packets from the pipeline, the INT packets, and generating the report towards the collector, which is this guy. And this could be, by the way, Sonic itself. So now this guy is waiting for packets. This is where I'm injecting the packet. Okay, and you see the packet injected as a UDP packet. The UDP, it's a DNS frame actually. It's a DNS port 3535. Okay, so I'll just generate this packet. packet went out, and you see here, this is what the screen dumped, which essentially is saying that there is a packet received. By the way, this is all mininet topology, so so this mininet topology I will not push out. It will be just a client and the collector. Here we are saying there's some debug commands. Ignore that. I was still working. That this is the source IP packet is received on this interface. This probably will be the network interface on the switch. System ID, etc., etc. And then comes the more interesting part, which is the IFA report. And in this report, it's saying this is the header, which is a version 2. If you remember, the IFA header has is a L3 extension header. It has a next header field, which says that what is the following L4 header, which is present. So that's 17, which is UDP. There's some information on flags and length. Then there is a metadata header, which says what's the request vector, what's the hop limit, what's the current length. And then here, it's 32 bytes of packet. The reason why it's 32 is 20 bytes of IP header, which comes all the way to this point. And then 4 bytes of IFA header and 8 bytes of UDP header. That's how 32 we landed. And then after that is the device metadata in a metadata stack. So this is the last hop, followed by the previous hop, and so on and so forth. Right. So this is what I plan to push in the GitHub. This is probably, I mean, feel free to give me comments, but there will be essentially 3 pieces of code. One will be the proto file. One will be the client side with a packet as a file, reading from the file, and this will be the collector, which will actually collect the data and then dump it into a log file. And this is deserialization of the proto files. So that's something which I have been working on that I'll push in the GitHub. And that will pretty much complete all the necessary components on the INT set of APIs, which were the definition of the APIs, and then the data model and how the data will be presented to a NOS or to a collector. Okay, so that's pretty much it from my side. I'll open the floor for questions and discussions. So back to you, team. Any questions? I hope I did not put everybody to sleep. Looks like I did. Okay, all right. So, sorry. Yeah.
That was Mickey. So last time we discussed a few things about ACL reference and grouping of objects and so on. So I have a separate pull request on that, and I was wondering if any others from the community have looked at any of that or have any opinions on the pull request that Jay has for TEM-INT versus the one that I have.
Hi, this is Ramesh. I did look at it, but I think I thought we were going to discuss the approach and talk about it today.
Go ahead, Ramesh.
No, I thought I did look at what Mickey pulled in the GitHub. I thought we were going to discuss the pros and cons of the approach today.
We can discuss. didn't know that was a plan, but that's okay. We can discuss that. Go ahead. You can start the discussion.
Yeah. So Mickey, if you want to just refresh everybody else on the call what your pull does, and then we can take it from there.
Okay. So there were at least a couple different items. So one thing was on the ACL. So in Jay's pull request, you have a TAM-INT object that includes the details of what you do as a source or initiator of a packet, such as what your request vector, instruction vector might be, which fields you want to collect. It also includes some of the things that drive reporting, like your collector and things like that. And then that refers to an ACL. So the binding is from the in Jay's version, the binding is from the TAM-INT object to the ACL. In my pull request, it's the other way around. So the ACL uses its normal port, VLAN, whatever else binding. You have a bunch of rules in the ACL, and then there is an action which refers to a TAM-INT group, which contains a lot of those source or initiator related attributes, such as the request vector, things you want to collect, a hop limit, so on, and the namespace. And we talked a little about, what the implications would be. So in Jay's stuff, he wanted it all hung off a single hierarchy with the references all going the same way. My claim was that if you do it that way, then you end up comparing priorities across different ACLs, and it's not 100% of the ACL functionality as it's been defined so far. That was one big discussion. A second one is how we specify the domain boundaries. So in Jay's case, it's an ACL action to terminate INT. I had just a port list, but what's the proper way to specify the domain boundary is a question. And then the third one is whether the initiator and terminator type of attributes belong in the same object, or should we have more than one object? So those were kind of the different categories, and I have a description of a lot of that in the pull request that I did.
Right. So, Mickey, we discussed this, I think now probably 3 times, that this proposal does give you a way to implement the way you would like to implement, right? It's not a mandatory field. The ACL group is not a mandatory field. It's an optional field. So if you don't want to hang it off, let's say you don't want to use the TAM object at all, you can still create these individual objects and then bind it in the ACL itself, just the way you are binding, right? That's one way to do it. My preferred way, my suggestion was to you that do bind it in the TAM object, but then break it apart in your side driver and rebind it internally so that your internal implementation is abstracted out. And on the top, from the configuration point of view, is still a one way to configure INT. That was my suggestion. Regarding, sorry.
So Jay, before just on that topic, is there a one TAM object can bind or can link to multiple ACL entries?
You can do that. It's a list object. Yes, you can do that.
Yeah. So whereas with Mickey's approach, a given ACL will only bind to one TAM object. So it's a little different when you look at it from a overall how these things can work. They both achieve the same purpose, which is to bind a flow identified by an ACL to a TAM object to identify what we need to do from a telemetry perspective for that given flow. It could be, but at the end of the day, a TAM object is defining a set of telemetry parameters that need to be gathered for that is listed that needs to be gathered. Period. Which you could say all packets from this port, I want to do that, and that's the TAM object. All packets with this port, this VLAN, I want to do that, or all packets this flow identified by the ACL, I want to gather that. So there are multiple ways to bind a TAM object to the things that a user wants to do. So there are flexibilities in both approaches. From a implementation point of view, for to support all users, is there any way we could specify the SAI TAM architecture to allow for both? Is my first question.
Yes, and that's a very good question. So before I answer that, there are few things there are few assumptions which I would like us to make, right? Or rather, few agreements which I would like us to have. That from a Sonic point of view, when we are configuring a feature, do we want to give one way of configuration or multiple ways of configuration? And my thinking is, as a participant in the community, that it should be a single way of configuring a feature, right? That is
not necessarily if Sonic is running on different hardware implementations.
It could be, but let me just walk you through my thought process. And there is no thought process which is perfect, but that's just a stake in the ground. Okay. So there is a top level configuration interaction for a given feature. The less diversity in that layer is, the easier for a higher layer, which is a NOS, to operate on. It will always talk one API or one consistent set of APIs instead of trying to figure out which way to configure that feature. Okay, so that's level one. Then the second level which is the interaction with the lower level constructs, which could be the SAI object constructs internally, or could be device dependent constructs. There we should always have flexibility to support or give that flexibility to an individual chip vendor or an implementer to operate the way we want to operate, right? Because that flexibility is very, very important. Right?
I agree.
Okay, so with that assumptions or agreements, if we can have, what I did, I said, okay, from a NOS point of view or a higher layer point of view, one consistent object which you interact for anything telemetry, which is streaming, INT, whatever you want to do, is a TAM object. Whenever you talk, you just talk TAM object, nothing else. And then it's up to the SAI driver, which consumes the TAM object, to take that TAM object and tease it apart in the most hardware-friendly way, right? And in this proposal, I went actually extra mile to make sure that's supported, that's doable. And that's what I proposed, Mickey, to you in last meeting as well, that you can take this and you can tease it apart, your ACL group, your event, ports, collectors, and you can put it back the way you have done it in detail. You can hang everything back onto the ACL. Nobody's preventing it. But from a configuration point of view, from the NOS, you can say that NOS can do the same things as well, right? But then it goes back to my previous argument. So that is one thing which I have in mind, which I thought it would be nice if we can agree on. Then comes the nitty-gritty details that are the attributes enough, or is something is missing? Do you want to have a separate boundary? I think that we can deal with it. That's not a bigger problem, but this is a bigger, this is a more fundamental agreement we should have. Back to you, Ramesh.
I agree with your assumption that at a NOS level, you want to be consistent with one approach, and the SAI driver level, you tailor it to the hardware the SAI driver is working with. But this document that we are looking at is a SAI document, and is the document only focused on putting the architecture together for NOS to SAI interaction, or is it the entire stack?
It provides both. So there is a set of API which NOS is going to interact. And as I said, they are all only create TAM APIs and the TAM constructs. And then once the TAM object is created, then it is handed over to the driver. And then it's up to the driver then how it wants to deal with it.
So can we try to see if we can show examples of both approaches with the APIs that are defined between the SAI layer and the SAI drivers?
Yes, so the document has been published in the pull request. It's a Word doc, and there is a complete workflow to how to create a TAM object finally, right?
Yeah.
Mickey, you can take that, and what you can do, you can add another. I mean, Irfan did it in the last iteration because he had this use case of legacy devices. And we had a discussion, and exactly this is what we did. We made sure that it works for legacy. So what you can do once the TAM object is constructed, you can work in a reverse direction that tease apart the TAM, walk from the TAM object, get your INT object, get your ACL object, and rebind things together in the ACL. And put an example. It is doable.
So I agree that it is doable. I think both approaches can be implemented and you can get INT functionality. I think there are implications, and I don't think that what I'm proposing has any problems in being consistent with the high-level principles that you mentioned. I think we just have to decide which way we're going, and then we can start working through the details.
Does the entire community agree that we need both approaches, and we need to somehow show the use case of both approaches in the document, and just go with that?
Okay, so with regard to the ACL one specifically, the main difference is what you specify as the action of the ACL. Because, if you say that the binding that, the binding that Jay is proposing exists, that you can bind from a TAM object to an ACL, then obviously the other way of binding already exists. But the difference you have is in the action is in Jay's proposal, the action is to initiate INT or terminate INT. In the proposal that I had, the action is actually a reference to a TAM object that contains all the details that the initiator applies. I'm not sure how you would do that, how you would support both, unless you specify two almost conflicting attributes.
So
I'm a little unsure how you would do both.
I think you would do both, meaning both from a NOS interaction point of view or in the SAI driver?
Yeah, so Ramesh, did you mean both in terms of the object and attributes that we define, or?
No, I meant both
under the covers, which is what Jay is referring to.
Yeah, I was looking at under the covers just to get consensus and move on. at some point we need to converge here, and I'm looking at, as long as the hardware dependent drivers can support the models as needed for the hardware. The NOS interaction, today it's Sonic, it could be any other OS down the road. One consistent way has its advantages over there. So I don't have any specific opinion from a NOS to SAI layer interaction point of view. It adds complication to some other OS that needs to interact with the SAI, but I don't have any opinion on that.
So, Mickey, why don't you, I think what Ramesh is suggesting, that take a stab of constructing the ACL bound object, ACL as a main object from the TAM object. And as we talk, that's doable. Why don't you update the spec on with that example? And
yeah, I will
walk through, then you'll maybe realize that there might be we are missing something.
Okay.
That's a good idea, Mickey. I think let's do that. And maybe 2 weeks from now we can talk about it, because next week at least some of us are got a different standards meeting.
Yeah, actually, the TAM meeting is in 2 weeks. We alternate the sessions between of SAI community meeting between TAM and other topics.
Yeah, unfortunately, I am on PTO the week of April 1st. So, Mickey, you'll have to do it on your own, or we push it out further.
No, so the content I can have, but if we want feedback from people like you, then maybe it should be the week after. I don't know.
8 a.m. Here will be 4 p.m. Where I am. So
Yeah.
there's no other way. It's April 4th, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Correct. Next meeting.
Yeah, I'm in a train between Vienna and Budapest. Tough. If you want to move the time out a little bit later in the day or a different day, I might be able to dial in. Thursday doesn't work for me. That's all.
You mean move the community meeting, or?
Yeah.
Oh, that will be hard because we have people from internationally.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
So
we all have meetings booked after that.
So we can do one thing. Mickey, you put the proposal, send it out for review.
We can do it via email first for a short while, and then we'll see what happens.
Yes, and then Thursday still. I mean, Ramesh, I'm taking the same itinerary too. I'm going to Budapest too, but I'm coming back. I'm coming back on 3rd.
Okay.
Yes, I'll be here a day before, so I'll be able to make it. So what we can do is we can have some initial discussion, like update the other folks with the thought process. And then, we always postpone the topics. We have done it before. We will not take any, there is no decision as such. It's a continuation of a discussion. So we can have a discussion and then have another set of discussion once we are.
Fair enough.
Let's do that, Mickey. So action item for you is to extend the example to reconstruct the detailed kind of implementation what you need. And in that process, you will maybe uncover things which need to either add or remove or move. So that's a good exercise.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay. Any opinion about on the simulator? Do you think it's a good thing to add, or it's not necessary?
I came in about 10 minutes late, but I saw the tail end of your presentation. I think it's a good thing to have.
Okay, Mickey, how about you?
But it's an open source simulator, right? People can make changes.
Yes, of course. And that's why in that, if you, I don't know if you caught that, I have added placeholders for IAM as well as P4INT. So you can very easily exceed it.
Okay. I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Mickey, you okay with that?
In general, I guess it's a good thing. I am a little concerned that protobuf is a little difficult for some in-chip implementations, but for the ones that can do it, it does show a way to do things.
Yes. So if you recall, I made a statement that either you can do within the chip only if you have an embedded controller. Of course, pipeline cannot do a serialization, dynamic serialization. Or if there is not an embedded controller, you can always do it from the side driver.
So in that model, what is the representation of the chip? Is it a?
It's a file.
How do you?
Chip
Sorry?
is nothing but a file with the packets.
Oh, I see. Okay. And
Yeah,
the pipeline is defined as
the chip, right?
Yeah. So in my environment, which is my own test environment, I have a full mininet topology. That's that's fairly big to push it into the SAI GitHub, and even if I push it, you won't be able to compile because not all the infrastructure is present there. And that probably will, I would like to push it. I'm talking internally that can we push it as a Broadcom repository. But there are proto files and there are the device side client, which is sending the data out to a collector, and the collector side, which is consuming the data, that we can push. So the pipeline will be nothing but a file with a number of packets in it. And the client will read this file as if the packets are coming from the pipeline, and then serialize it, generate a IOM INT report, and send it out to collector. And collector will just deserialize it and print it out. And actually, you can extend it on the collector side. Then you can have some Python pyplots, and you can render the data in graph. It's very easy to extend it. So it becomes a common tool which we all can use, extend, and do demos with it. It's just I thought it would be useful for more people than just me. But it's up to you guys. I mean, if you think that that's not needed, then let me just go ahead again.
Do you have any plans, or have you done anything like that, like streaming telemetry, like the statistics stuff, or anything like that?
So streaming telemetry, I just pushed out the proto files. I think I did not push out any simulation on that.
Okay.
This one is a little bit more interesting in the sense that it's a fairly active topic, and I thought that maybe it can do with some.
Hey, quick question. Sorry, I'm trying to catch up with this, the context of the discussion that's going on. Are you talking about the local collector or the collectors, or external collectors?
It can be either one of them. We don't differentiate.
Yeah, but this script that you're showing is this running on the supposed to be running on the switch?
It can be running on the switch. In that case, it becomes a local host.
Okay.
So Ramesh, I don't know if you probably did not got it. So this is just the message format which I have defined, and the IAM and P4INT, I have left them blank.
Okay.
So it's pretty easy for you to extend it. And the rest of the infrastructure, you don't have to. You have to write a equivalent. So once you define the IAM headers and the metadata stack, then in the client, you have to define the parser or the serialization. Deserialization, you don't have to do anything. So this is the encode. Encode INT. Right now, I'll try to clean it. Pass a parameter. And right now, if you see, it just do IFA encoding. I will change it. I'll pass a parameter on the command line, and then you can call IFA encode, IAM encode, and so on and so forth. And rest of the infrastructure will work as is without any change.
I think it has value in it, and we should keep it and pursue it and extend it.
Okay. Okay, that's pretty much it from my side. So action item is to for Mickey, you to extend the spec.
So if we had any comments on the document, how do we provide it? Because
On the document, it is checked into the
right. So because the docx is a binary document, right? So I'm just trying to figure out, if we had some, some editing request that needs to be done, how does it normally work? And if it was a SAI ACL, the header file that you show up, that shows there, it's a lot easier to comment.
That's a good question. I do not know. I'm not very active. I'm still fairly new, in the sense that I have not very actively. Can we just not put a comment here which is generic?
Okay.
No, so you'll either have to write your comments separate from the document, or you'd have to do like a pull request with a marked up document or something like that.
Okay.
I don't know. Can you merge two Word documents later?
I suppose I could just put down, the section number and then, write some text in there. But a markdown document would have been really convenient.
Yeah, I tried Markdown, but there were so many pictures that it became too big of an hassle, so I gave up.
All right.
Okay, so I guess, is there any other topic today?
So this is actually the designated topic for today. If there is no comment or other feedbacks, we are going to return 5 minutes to everyone.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
next week's topic will be PTF test for SAI. Yeah, thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.